Do you sometimes feel like an alien, like the whole world overwhelms you, and do other people always tell you you're too sensitive? Well, then you might be a highly sensitive person who perceives stimuli more intensely. But strangely though, that's not enough. On top of that, somehow we as highly sensitive people magically attract a traumatic childhood. We seem to struggle more and recover less from past wounds. Why that is the case and what you can do about it, you will see in this video. Let's dive in. Welcome to today's episode. My name is Robert and I was a really sensitive human being myself for my whole life. Always wondering why I never fit in, why other people would go out partying regularly, don't need that much sleep, work better in groups than alone, etc. The moment I found out why I always was like this was truly enlightening, and I want to share this with you in today's video. In the end of 2021, during my 5th breakup, I was struggling hard with panic attacks, aka emotional flashbacks, with anxiety and heavy somatic symptoms such as severe pain in my gut. I couldn't eat for days, and there is that one day where I really hit rock bottom. I was in so much emotional pain, I understood why people wanted to quit this life. This breakup, the trauma symptoms, the anxiety, the panic, shame, and guilt mixed up to a toxic cocktail that flooded and overwhelmed my sensitive soul. And I remember myself standing on a meadow in a rural town at the coast of the United Kingdom, looking out over the ocean, clenching my hand into a fist and swearing that I would never, ever feel this intense pain again in my whole life. And to find out a way out of this dilemma, my ex at that time recommended me a bunch of therapy options and the book The Highly Sensitive Person by Dr. Elaine and Aaron that I have here as well still. And from that time, I made a bunch of notes in that book. And sometime later, by the while, I recorded a podcast with her in London where we talk about therapy for highly sensitive people. It's still online on this channel. I will link that episode to you up here and in the description below. According to that book, The Highly Sensitive Person by Dr. Elaine and Aaron matches the following criteria. Highly sensitive person is highly empathetic and emotional. For example, maybe you experienced that, when you have been a child, many of us had pets. And a good example for that is for the high sense of empathy. And for example, your pet died, your rabbit died. You were the person who was extremely sad. You were the person who was crying a lot, or the family dog died. And maybe the other family members were not that much involved in the death of the pet. Well, that's a good example here. Next thing is difficulty with changes and the need for routines here. Also typical. Being easily overstimulated due to a higher perception of stimuli. Needing a lot of time to reflect. Being aware of the needs of other people and your own needs. My first therapist, she always said that we as highly sensitive people, we don't have other options than listening to our needs and listening to our emotions because we are so closely built to them. We seek meaning or purpose in our lives. Really drastically, it's very important to us. We are highly creative and often interested in art, in music, in books. We pick up on small subtleties and we are very detail orientated or solution focused. We often take things personally. We overthink things regularly and therefore need more time to make decisions, and we have a strong need for solo time and isolation. By the way, the concept of the highly sensitive person is often also compared with autism spectrum disorder. there is a huge overlap in those two conditions. By the way, of course, the highly sensitive person is not an official condition. It's a concept described by some authors. It also can be possible that the highly sensitive person is the feminine version of autism, of undiagnosed autism, or potentially also a mild form actually of autism, or something that is related to Asperger's syndrome, because the symptoms are so closely related. And if you're curious about that, or if you already thought during that video, well, highly sensitive person, that very much sounds like autism, I recently also uploaded a 3-part series on the comparison between those two, where we discuss that. I linked that in the description below, and up here the first episode of that series. And in the end, what's also true is that all neurodivergent conditions like autism and ADHD are also highly sensitive conditions, because there is this really sensitive nervous system involved in all of these conditions. And of course, there are some exceptions. For example, hyposensitivity that exists in autism and Asperger's. 50% of people with Asperger's symptom are not highly sensitive, but more on the hyposensitive side. But sensitivity definitely, certainly does attract trauma somehow. This is what we definitely see. And there are multiple reasons why that is, and we explore 4 of them now. The first one is that in families, the highly sensitive child, I call it the HSC, talked about it with Jules DeVito here on the channel as well, made an episode about that where I talk with her about highly sensitive children, link that up here in the description below. And the HSC, the highly sensitive child, is often the alien, the weird one, is often different to other family members who are not that sensitive. And the highly sensitive child feels, perceives, and lives differently than the other family members. Patrick Teahan, he explains that very nicely on his YouTube channel as well. And with his clients, he usually generates some kind of genograms with his clients. And the genogram is a diagram of the emotional history of your family. And now just imagine a really sensitive child or a neurodivergent child in a not so sensitive family. The child will feel wrong, will feel misplaced, will feel like an alien, is not being able to talk and to express all the specific emotion and needs the child has. And an abusive family system, such a toxic family system, then definitely highly influences the sensitive child more. So, from the perspective of the abusive family members, so narcissistic members, members with a lower degree of sensitivity, members who don't have the ability to re-regulate themselves properly. From their perspective, highly sensitive aliens, sorry, I meant children, of course, but for them they are aliens, yes. Those are the weirdos, the people who do not fit in. And these families usually have one thing in common. If raising the child or the children is not the focus of the family system, but instead the focus is often trying to re-regulate themselves because they never learned that, because deep inside mom and dad are children themselves who apply coping strategies like addictions, don't have the ability to self-soothe, constantly fight with each other. For those families, then children are not the focus and they're seen as a byproduct of the family, which makes the family toxic. And such a child 100% will be neglected in various ways because the child is not the focus, simply spoken. And there are different things that we can talk through here. For example, comparison, which is applied when you're constantly compared to your sister. Why are you not like your sister? Why do your sister has better degrees? Or there is parentification involved. The parents project the need for taking care of onto the child, so the child has the feeling that the child has to take care of the parents and the parents are not taking care of the child. There's oppression. You don't deserve to be seen who you are. Your needs are bad. You shouldn't have these needs at all, those weird sensitive needs. There is manipulation. You have to rescue us, not your own person. If the parents, for example, struggle with mental health problems or addiction, and there's emotional abuse as well, you are a burden, is what the child learns here. And emotional abusive caretakers in those families, they usually show one or more of the following characteristics: alcohol and or drug addiction, narcissism or psychopathy, someone with strong, uncontrollably emotional states and outbursts, and not having enough capacity to re-regulate and self-soothe. But you know who has enough capacity? The highly sensitive child in the family system, or in adult relationships, the highly sensitive partner or person. And this is reason number 2 why sensitivity magically attracts trauma. Because sensitive people offer a lot of emotional capacity for other people who are traumatized or sick people, like the caregivers or narcissistic partners. In every relationship, the most sensitive person therefore holds the most emotional tension. And this is because of their sense for empathy and the feeling for subtleties that we talked about in the beginning already. Now, the highly sensitive child in a toxic family system holds emotional tension of their caregivers and the family. They hold the repressed emotions of other siblings and parents. They hold the embarrassment. They hold the shame and the feelings of guilt. And as adults, they continue doing that and hold the emotional tensions of their often also wounded narcissistic partners. Like in the following short story here about Sophie. Sophie has always been the strong one. As a child, she observed everyone's emotions, her mom's tears and meltdowns, her brother's resentment and anger, and her father's silence and uninvolvement. No one asked her to, but her sensitivity automatically picked up on what others ignored or what others try to repress and don't want to feel. But she has to feel it. And the tension they couldn't hold settled on her shoulders, on the shoulders of the most sensitive person in the family. And now as an adult, it's the same for her. Her partner Mark struggles with his own wounds, and Sophie feels his anger and his sadness before he even speaks. She smoothes things over, carries his mood, and absorbs the weight he doesn't want to face. But not all highly sensitive people are just passive observers. Some truly become the center of the frustration, resentment, and dysregulation of the whole toxic family system as well. They become the scapegoat of the family. Sounds familiar to you? That's reason number 3 here. I've observed that in so many cases, including myself, when something is going wrong or a caregiver within a toxic family system is not being able to re-regulate themselves, the sensitive person becomes the scapegoat. It's your fault that the vacuum cleaner is broken. It's your fault that dad came home again late, fully drunk. It's your fault that mom can't get a job and is unemployed. It's always your fault, whatever you do or they do. The highly sensitive person becomes the bullseye of resentment and anger of the other people within the family. And it makes sense because on the one hand, they are different in the perception than others. On the other hand, they try to be empathetic and are solution-orientated, trying their best to solve all the problems that others can't handle. And often they also try to be empathetic with their loved ones, because children love their parents, they love their siblings, they love their partners when they're grown up. And we see that in our next story here about Ella. Ella always felt like the problem in her family since the beginning of her life. And maybe you can already relate here. When tensions rose, her sensitivity made her speak up. Can we talk about this? But instead of listening, her parents blamed her. You're too dramatic, her father said. Stop causing trouble, her mother added. When her brother acted out, it was her fault. When her parents thought she was stirring things up. Ella's sensitivity always reflected the family's buried issues, and they made her the scapegoat for problems they refused to face. What's important to understand here is that highly sensitive people like Ella are often labeled as too much or the troublemakers, not because they're wrong, but because they see what others try to hide. And they have to address it. Oh, my first therapist, again, always told me highly sensitive people have no choice. They have to feel and express their emotions, communicate their needs, and set their boundaries. If they don't do it, they feel sick. They can't hold that tension. There is one thing that we didn't talk about yet in detail when it comes to sensitivity and trauma, and this is the narcissistic component. Highly sensitive children are always the antagonist for the narcissistic family members. And this is why the highly sensitive child attracts the narcissist like a magnet. And the highly sensitive person, as a grown-up, attracts narcissistic partners like a magnet. This is because they offer everything narcissists want. And I like to display this in the form of the model of a magnet here. We have on the top side, we have the narcissistic side, and on the bottom side we have the highly sensitive or the empathetic side. And the narcissist, they feel entitled to receive attention. They exploit other people's empathy. They love to express themselves and they love to be at the center of attention. They long for being listened and to be understood. And what do highly sensitive people do? What do highly empathetic people do? They give a lot of attention. And they are really good empathetic listeners because they have a deep desire for understanding others, for seeing their needs, for helping and supporting them. And this is what narcissists love. That whole concept, does that sound familiar to you in some form? Well, then maybe you can identify with our next person and story, with Mia. And I recently read this story on Reddit. Mia was always the good listener in the family. And as a highly sensitive child, she observed her mother's moods, soothed her anger, and shrank her needs to keep the peace in the family, because the mother was the narcissist here. And her narcissistic mother took full advantage of her, using Mia's empathy to get endless comfort and validation. And as an adult, the pattern continued. Her narcissistic partners were drawn to Mia like a magnet. Her kindness and emotional depth gave them everything they craved, while she ignored her own needs. Highly sensitive people like Mia attract narcissists because they offer what narcissists want, compassion and care, while losing themselves in the process and giving up their own needs. Does that sound familiar to you? Well, then maybe you are also stuck in such a situation like Mia is, which is very horrible, and I recommend you watching this video where we talk about when it's time to enter a relationship, because sometimes it's better to stop neglecting your own needs, to find compromises, because you can't heal a narcissist. You can't heal someone who's not seeing that he or she is sick. Now, after hearing these reasons, you hopefully have a better understanding of why sensitivity attracts trauma. But the question is open, what to do about it, what you can do. Definitely, I always recommend that continue your healing journey and your trauma work. Maybe as a grown-up, some distance from other toxic family members is also a good idea here. I don't want to recommend to cut off all the contact you have with your mom or dad or siblings, but maybe it's good to reduce that contact a bit just to protect yourself a bit more and also to learn to express your emotions, your needs, and set better boundaries. It's also a boundary exercise here. It's good practice for setting healthier boundaries to reduce that contact a bit. Also, scan your environment if there is a narcissist actually right now in your life present who exploits you. Don't let that happen. I will also create some extra content here on narcissism in the near future and how to spot them especially. That's very important to identify a narcissist because we are also often blind, especially if we don't know about the concept of narcissism yet. Then we are often blind and we just think, we have to please them just a bit more, or maybe we can help them or heal them, but it's not possible. Narcissism, that's also a personality disorder. It's called NPD, Narcissistic Personality Disorder. It's very important that you learn about that if you haven't yet and if you have been exploited in the past. As an HSP, it's also important that you learn to take more space and more time for you, because that's very important. Again, it's also in this book here, by the way. There are a lot of strategies on taking care of yourself, setting better boundaries, taking your space. Don't feel guilty for doing that. I felt guilty quite often when I did that, but don't feel guilty. Just take your time, take your space. You're very sensitive. That's a good thing. That's something that you need. You're not helpless. You're not at the mercy of other people and your emotions. Remind that, ground yourself, and try to meet your needs. And now back to my story of the beginning. When I started therapy as a highly sensitive person in 2021, I finally felt understood and I learned a bunch of strategies to manage my sensitivity better. I learned that I'm totally fine like I am. I am not an alien. And step by step, I also met many people who are also very sensitive, who are also like me. And we developed a very good understanding for each other. And I learned as well strategies to re-regulate myself, to regulate my over-aroused central nervous system. And all these things that I learned, I like to share with you. I built a premium course platform for that. And in our online courses, I share everything that I learned during my healing journey. In all of my therapies, I wrote that down here, and I created a step-by-step path with over 30 video courses and 30 exercises that you can do to learn to set better boundaries, to communicate your needs in a healthy way, and to express your emotions better. You can become a member today at understandable.net/join. Get access today, understandable.net/join. And now I'm curious, what do you think? Have you also made similar experiences as highly sensitive people? Do you have narcissists in your life that you want to get rid of? Definitely let me know in the comments. And if you want to support the podcast, leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify as well. And I see and speak to you next time for another episode here on the channel. Have a great day.